Chapter 6. Out of the frying pan into the fire. Bilbo had escaped the goblins, but he didn't know where he was. He had lost hood, cloak, food, pony, his buttons, and his friends. He wandered on and on, till the sun began to sink. Westwards, behind the mountain, the shadows fell across Bilbo's path, and he looked back. Then he looked forward and could see before his only ridges and slopes falling towards lowlands and plains glimpsed occasionally between the trees. "Good heavens!" he exclaimed. "I seem to have got right to the other side of Misty Mountains, right to the edge of the land beyond. Where Gandalf and the dwarves have got to. I only hope to goodness that they are not still back in there in the power of the goblins." He still wandered on, out of the little high valley over its edge, and down the slopes beyond, but all the while a very uncomfortable thought was growing inside him. He wondered whether he ought not, now he had the magic ring, to go back into the horrible, horrible tunnels and look for his friends. He had just made up his mind that it was his duty, that he must turn back, and very miserable he felt about it when he heard voices. He stood and listened. It did not sound like goblins, so he crept forward carefully. He was on a stony path winding downwards, with a rocky wall on the left hand, and other side the ground sloped away, and there were dells below the level of the path, overhung with bushes and sloe trees. In one of these dells, under the bushes, people were talking. He crept nearer, and suddenly he saw, peering between two big boulders, a head and a red hood on it. It was Balin, doing "Look out." He could clapped and shouted for joy, but he did not. He had still got the ring on, for fear of meeting someone unexpected and present. He saw that Balin was looking straight at him, without noticing. "I'll give them all a surprise," he thought, as he crawled into the bushes at the edge of the dell. Gandalf was arguing with the dwarves. They were discussing all that happened, instead the troubles, and wondered and debated what we were to do now. The dwarves were grumbling, and Gandalf was saying that they could not possibly go on without the journey, leaving Mr. Baggins in the hand of goblins, without trying to find him if he was dead or alive or dead, and without trying to rescue him. "After all, he is my friend, and not a bad little chap. I feel responsible for him. I wish to goodness you had not lost them." The dwarves wanted to know why he had ever been brought at all, why he could not stick to his friends and come along with them, and why the wizard had not chosen someone else with more sense. He had been more troubled than you so far, and one said, if we have to go back now and into those abominable tunnels to look for him, then dry him, I say. Gandalf answered angry, "I brought him, and don't bring things that are not of no use. Either you help me or look for him, or I go and leave you here and to get out of the mess as best as you can yourself. If we can only find him again, you will thank me before all is over. Whether did you want to go on and drop for him for Dory?" "You would have dropped him," said Dory, "if a goblin had suddenly grabbed your legs." If goblin had suddenly grabbed your legs behind in the dark, tripped up your feet and kicked you in the back, then why didn't you pick him up again? Good heavens, can you ask? Goblins fighting and biting in the dark. Everyone fell over bodies and hitting one another. You nearly chopped the head of Glamdring. And Thorin was stabbing here, there, and everywhere with Orchist. And all of a sudden you gave one of your blinding flashes, and we saw the goblins running back yelping. You shouted, 'Follow me, everyone,' and everyone ought to have followed. We thought everyone had. There was no time to count, as well as you know quite well, till we dashed through the gate guards, out of the lower door, and helter-skelter down there. And here we are without the burglar confiscate. And here's the burglar, said Bilbo, stepping down into the middle of them and slipped off the ring. Bless me, how they jumped. Then they shouted with surprise and delight. Gandalf was astonished as any of them. Balin he called to Balin and told him that he thought of a lookout man who let people walk right into them like that without warning. It is the fact that Bilbo's reputation went up a very great deal with the dwarves after this. If they had still doubted that he was really a first-class burglar, in spite of Gandalf's words, they doubted no longer. Balin was the most puzzled of all, but everyone said it was a very clever bit of work. Indeed, Bilbo was so pleased with their praise that he just chuckled inside and said nothing whatever about the ring. And when they asked him how he did it, he said, "Oh, just crept along, very carefully and quietly." Well, it is the first time that even a mouse had crept along carefully and quietly under my very nose and not been spotted, said Balin. "And I take off my hood for you. To you," which he did. "Balin, at your service," said he. "Your servant, Mr. Baggins," said Bilbo. Then they wanted to know all about his adventures after they left him, and he sat down and they told them everything except about finding the ring. Not just now he saw it. They were particularly interested in the riddle competition and shuddered the most appreciatively at him in the description of Gollum. And then I couldn't think of any other questions. With him sitting beside me, and Bilbo, so I said, "What's in my pocket?" He couldn't guess in 3 goes, so I said, "What about your promise? Show me a way out." So I said, but he came at me to kill me, and I ran and fell over, and he missed me in the dark. Then I followed him because I heard him talking to himself. He thought I really knew the way out, so he was making for it. And then he sat down in the entrance, and I could not get by, so I jumped over him and escaped, ran down to the gate. "What about the guards?" they asked. "Weren't there any?" "Oh, yes, lots of them, but I dodged them. I got stuck in the door, which was only open a crack. I lost lots of buttons," he said sadly, looking at his torn clothes. "But I squeezed through all right, and here I am." For the dwarves looked at him quite a new respect when he talked about dodging guards, jumping over Gollum, and squeezing through as if it was not very difficult or very alarming. "What did I tell you?" said Gandalf, laughing. Mr. Baggins has more about him than you guess." He gave Bilbo a queer look from under his bushy eyebrows, and he said this, and the Hobbit wondered if he guessed a part of his tale that he had left out. Then he had questions to ask his own, for if Gandalf had explained it all by now to the dwarves, Bilbo had not heard it. He wanted to know how the wizard had turned up again, and where they had all got to now. The wizard, to tell the truth, never minded explaining his cleverness more than once. So he told Bilbo that both he and Elrond had been well aware of the presence of evil goblins in the part of the mountains, but their main gate used to come out on a different path, one more easy to travel by. So they often caught people benighted near their gates. Evidently, people had given up going that way, and the goblins must have opened their new entrance at the top of the pass the dwarves had taken quite recently, because it had been found quite safe up now. "I must see if I can find a more or less decent giant to block it up again," said Gandalf, "or soon there will be no getting over the mountains at all." As soon as Gandalf heard Bilbo's yell, he realized that what had happened. In the flash which killed the goblins that were grabbing him, he had nipped inside the crack just as it snapped. He followed after the drivers and prisoners right to worked up in the best magic he could in the shadow. A very trickish business it was. He said touch and go, but of course Gandalf had made a special study of bewitchments with fire and rites. Even the Hobbit had never forgot the magic of fireworks at old Took's Midsummer Eve parties, as you remember. The rest we all know, except that Gandalf knew all about the back door, as the goblins called the lower gate, where Bilbo lost his button. As a matter of fact, it was well known to everyone who was acquainted with this part of the mountains, but it took a wizard to keep his head in the tunnels and guide him to the right direction. They made that gate ages ago, he said, partly for a way to escape, if they needed one, partly as a way out into the lands beyond, where they still can come in the dark and do great damage. The god will it always, and no one has ever managed to block it up. They will guard it stoutly after this. He laughed. All of the others laughed too. After all, they had lost a good deal, but they had killed the great goblin and a great many others besides, and they had all escaped. So they might be said to have had the best of it so far. But the wizard called for them for their senses. We must be getting on at once. Now we are a little rested, he said. They will be after us in hundreds when night comes, and already shadows are lengthening. They can smell our footsteps for hours and hours after we have passed. We must be miles on before dusk. There will be a bit of moon. If it keeps fine, then that is lucky. Not that they mind the moon much, but it will give us a little light to steer by. Oh yes, he said, to answer to more questions from the hobbit. You lose track of time inside goblin tunnels. Today is Thursday, and it was Monday night or Tuesday morning that we were captured. We have gone miles and miles and came right down through the heart of the mountain and are now on the other side. Quite a shortcut, but we are not at all the point to which our passes would have brought us. We are too far to the north. And we have some awkward country ahead, and we are still pretty high up. Let's go on. I am dreadfully hungry, groaned Bilbo, who was suddenly aware that he had not a meal since the night before the last. Just think that for a hobbit, his stomach felt all empty and loose, and his legs all wobbly, now that the excitement was over. Can't help it, said Gandalf, unless you like to go back and ask the goblins nicely to let you have your pony back and your luggage. No, thank you, said Bilbo. Very well, we must just tighten our belts and trudge on, or we shall make it made into supper, and that will be much worse than having none ourselves. As they went on, Bilbo looked from side to side for something to eat, but the blackberries were still only in flower, and of course there were no nuts, not even hawthorn berries. He nibbled a bit of sorrel and drank from a little small mountain stream across the path, and he ate 3 wild strawberries that he found on its bank, but it was not much. Then they still went on and on. The rough path disappeared, the bushes and the long grasses beyond the boulders, the patches of rabbits cropped turf, and the thyme and the sage and the marjoram, and the yellow rockets all vanished. And they found themselves at the top of a wide, steep slope of fallen stone, and the remains of a landslide. When they began to go down this, rubbish and small pebbles rolled away from their feet. Soon larger bits of split stone went clattering down, and started other pieces below them slithering and rolling. Then lumps of rock were disturbed and bounded off crashing with the dust and the noise. Before long, the whole slope above them and below them seemed on the move, and they were sliding away, huddled all together in fearful confusion of slipping, rattling, cracking slabs and stone.